We're talking, of course, about the Democratic Republic of the Congo, even though, of course, some people will tell you that even though it is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, when it comes to democracy, it seems to, in fact, have a democracy deficit. Is that something that you would agree with?
I would say that's correct, yeah.
You would say that is correct.
Yes.
Now, you just made a very important research, which you are due to share with the rest of the world tomorrow, and it is called Congo Blues, Scoring Kabila's Rule. What inspired you to do that type of research?
I've been working on Congo since about 2000, when I was still at war. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was very interested in the dimensions of the war and what the possibilities of escaping conflict. Mm-hmm. And then I've stayed interested in the country over time, and I was, like many others, very enthusiastic when the transition period ended in 2006 with a new regime and hopeful. And so, as you said earlier, there's a long legacy of bad governance and of exploitation in Congo. I mean, it was really set up as a country, a state pretending to have institutions, but really an enterprise of theft to begin with. Let's be honest, Leopold II went there to steal, to extract, to dominate. And Belgian colonization was by and large the same thing. And then Mobutu reproduced that pattern. And there was expectation, and I hope that things could change. That, maybe civil society and opposition and groups that didn't have a voice until then understood the consequence of previous regime, and that the donors also stepped in, and that we could really transform this country. And there was hope. And I've, like others, I've been disappointed, but I've tried to make sense of it, try to understand what pulls Congo away from this democratic potential.
What about some critics who say that there was a very, very brief interlude, especially when the Congo regained its political independence back in 1960, that for a brief period you had a gentleman by the name Patrice Emery Lumumba. What do we know about Lumumba? If in fact Lumumba had lived, what difference could he probably have made? And the other important question perhaps, which are the forces really that assassinated him and put Mobutu Sese Seko in place, mm-hmm. who stayed there for 32 years? Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good question. I'll tell you what, I have mixed feelings about Lumumba myself. I can certainly see his appeal and the fact that he represents a vision and is definitely a charismatic leader who can mobilize people to this day, mobilize youth and mm-hmm. and has a worthwhile objective. But Lumumba had a mixed record as a politician. I think he made some significant mistakes that very quickly weakened his position mm-hmm. As soon as the Belgians left.
For example?
For example, he agreed with the Belgians in keeping a very strong Belgian presence and in having a constitution and a system that was still only partly independent, but it was a fairly realistic decision. But then as soon as the day of the independence came, he gave a speech that was very uplifting in many ways, but also led to a quick spread of mutinies and people being fed up with the system that he had himself endorsed. And so he kind of shot himself in the foot to some extent.
He was, of course, also an admirer and very, very loyal to Ghanaian founding leader, the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah.
Yeah, I'm not sure he had Nkrumah's touch for all things politics, but certainly you can't blame his intention, And I don't know what would have happened if he had been there, but certainly he alienated a lot of people. Of course, the Belgians did not like him to begin with, and were reluctantly putting up with him. But it didn't make things easier when he went after the king and when he went after the Belgians at the time. And of course, then he couldn't keep the country together. So some interests thought that maybe it was better to play the card of Katanga, which had the resources. And quickly there was a coalescence of domestic and international interests that undermine the future of Congo. So there's plenty of blame to share. There's no doubt about that.
You're talking about Shombe here.
Yeah.
Shombe, in fact, coming from Katanga, and here we're talking about Moise Katumbi. In fact, I think Shombe was Moise Shombe, correct?
It was Moise also, you're right. Yes.
Very interesting.
Two Moses, yeah.
Very interesting. Now, in your Congo Blues, you talk about, among other things, that you refer, for example, to the war in the DRC as a decade of savage war. What exactly do you mean by that? Are you suggesting that there have been some civilized wars somewhere?
Well, I think that, to some extent, you can certainly say that war is part of many civilizations. the savage dimension here does not refer to people, but refer to the amount of violence and the degree to which the war has affected the dignity and the life of people. So, even though the war itself might not have had always high peaks of violence, it's estimated that more than 5 million people died of it directly or indirectly over the years. Now, that's an incredible toll. And if you go to Eastern Congo, you go to the Kivus, you go to North Katanga, to Maniema, to Oriental, the amount of human destitution from the war is overwhelming. And so there's a degree of savagery in the fact that this kind of conflict ruins people's life, whether they kill them or not. The amount of alienation and endangerment of people's life is just overwhelming.
But what about the external influence?
There's been
the external
plenty,
intervention. You're talking about Rwanda. You're talking about Uganda. You're talking about Burundi. You're talking about all sorts of countries here.
Yeah, Zimbabwe, Angola, you name
Chad.
it. Yeah, Chad, even Chad, yeah. No, there's no doubt that, at some point during the war, Congo became a bit of a black hole. The weakness of its own institutions sucked in many other actors, right? Now, certainly Uganda, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Angola had their own motivation, some economic, some strategic, to intervene beyond caring for Congo itself. But Congo made it possible. Mobutu's failure at governing and the extent to which he manipulated institutions to maintain himself in power weakened the state in such a way that it became an easy place for a small country like Rwanda to invade and almost control for a while.
What about others who will also say, yes, countries like Rwanda, Uganda obviously had their own interests and all that kind of stuff, but that in fact at the end of the day, they were proxy forces for larger and more important parties, really?
You hear that discourse quite a bit, and it's popular in Congo. And a lot of Congolese have what I would call sometimes a conspiracy way of thinking about stuff. Now, there's no doubt that historically, right, the U.S. was at least indirectly involved in the assassination of Lumumba. The U.S. certainly sponsored Mobutu for a long time and other Western forces. There's no doubt that, you can certainly make a plausible argument in terms of neo-colonial relationship. In terms of the war and the more recent events, I think it's much more ambiguous than that. There's no doubt that the West has advantage there, but American investors would prefer a much more peaceful state in which to do business. It's a tough place to operate. So it's not a clear thing about, Rwanda doing the bidding of the West in terms of stealing the resource of Congo. That's a narrative that you hear a lot there. I think the reality is a lot more complex than that. Not to deny that there's exploitation.